Thanks for coming, everybody. So before I get started, I'm just curious, are there any Veeam customers in the room? Would you mind sharing just for 10 seconds, sort of, or how long have you been using Veeam for?
It was in place when I started.
Oh, okay, so it's been there for a while. And if you could just, what's your experience been like so far?
It's been great. Support is awesome. Every time we have an issue, it's resolved typically the first day.
Great.
The ability to create, have a live migration. We actually migrated from units to a UCS.
Okay.
And live migrations.
So you did live migrations, okay, and worked, okay.
Minimal downtime.
Minimal downtime.
It was very impressive.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. So, I asked the question because our customers can evangelize far better than anybody from Veeam can, and we're fortunate enough that when you look at a measurement of customer loyalty, there's something called a Net Promoter Score. And so, for those of you not familiar with it, it's basically how likely will your customer tell their peers about your solution and do so enthusiastically. So just to kind of give you a benchmark, if you think of Apple, right? Apple's got a cult following. The iPhone 7, you had people camping out the night before so they can buy an iPhone. Their Net Promoter Score, and it's on a range from 0 to 100. And if I'm getting it correct, it's if you have a score somewhere in the mid-20s, that's considered generally good. So Apple's score is 62. It's practically off the charts. Veeam, by comparison, we're at 61. And my numbers might be off by 1 or 2, but in short, we have that sort of almost devotee-like following in terms of our users. And that's important, right? Because everything really is about the user experience today. If you have a good user experience, life is good. If you have a bad user experience, not so much. So when I was preparing this presentation, I was trying to think of some things, not so much on the technical side, but just things that people can relate to. How many people here have ever been stranded at the airport for, say, over 12 hours? Has anybody ever had to sleep at the airport? That's fun, right? It's a good user experience, It happened to me at Atlanta Hartfield. There was tornadoes rolling in, and they kept pushing the flights back, and then I found myself literally prostrate on the floor with vacuums going around my head. Yeah. So, I'm hoping to avoid that next time. And if you remember in the news about a couple months ago, we had 2 major airlines have system-wide outages. Flights were grounded. There was, in one case, this airline had 2,300 flights canceled. Does anybody want to take a guess? Because this is in the Wall Street Journal, guess what they lost in terms of revenue because of that? And just throw out a big number. 90? Close. There you go, bingo. $150 million, right? So that's a glaring number, right? And as big as that number is, it's arguable that the bigger cost is the loss to their, the credibility, the brand, the prestige, reputation. Just think about if you were coming back as a family from Disney World, 2 kids in tow, you can't get home, and you're stranded at the airport. The likelihood of you flying with that airline again is probably pretty low, right? Probably 0, very good. So trying to recover from an event like that is practically impossible. So average business, we did a survey of 1,500 IT managers, and they admitted that we have a gap between what our users expect from us and what we can actually deliver. I mean, you can live quite literally off your smartphone, right? You've got hundreds of applications out there, and by and large, they're always on, right? I mean, think about Uber or Amazon Web Store or any other application. And if there's a hiccup, you basically reboot the app or reset your browser, and they're back online. At least that's been my experience. But what I do is I have Uber and I have Lyft, because if I get to the airport and for some reason there's a problem, I'll just switch over. So the new cliche is, the competition really is only a click away. So when the moderator here mentioned that in that survey, we measured, the cost of application downtime or application availability or the lack thereof. On average for a business is $16 million. And when I first saw that, I was, it seemed a little high. But clearly, there are cases out there where that number can be completely blown away. But irregardless, it really is, how do you provide an experience so that you can do the things that help you innovate with your business, right? So if you can put to bed the housekeeping things This gentleman over here was talking about his experience with Veeam. If you can put those things to bed, and then you can actually focus on doing things that actually delight your customers and actually give an experience that they can't get anywhere else, you're going to drive loyalty. But if the service isn't available, it doesn't matter, right? So what is it that we can do to help you close the door on the availability gap? Because again, the numbers bear it out. Most people admit that they could do better, or that there's a gap there and there's risk. So Veeam, of course, we have a data protection platform. However, as you notice from all our signage and everything else, we talk about availability. Data protection is great, but it only really matters until you go to actually try to recover the data. But more importantly, what tools do you have in place so when the unexpected happens, you have a very fast way of getting that information back. Very fast way of recovering virtualized workloads. So that you're not going through a fire drill. It's just a few clicks and you have a virtual machine back up and running. The ability to get file level information back very quickly. Those are the types of capabilities that we enable. And we do it in the context of helping you leverage your existing investments. Let's face it, IT budgets aren't increasing, right? They're usually flat. Last figure I saw, but somewhere around 65% of the IT budget just goes towards keeping the lights on. So it doesn't leave a lot of money for additional investments. The other alternative is, how do I get the most out of what my existing infrastructure is? So modern storage, any NetApp users here? All right, not surprising. How do you leverage the capabilities that you get with your NetApp infrastructure? So NetApp's famous for their storage snapshots, SnapVault, SnapMirror, the ability to move data around very efficiently, get it in multiple places. How do you get the capabilities that NetApp brings in terms of very low recovery point objectives, so that I can, for example, take a critical application and take point-in-time snapshots every 15 minutes. So worst case scenario, I'm only 15 minutes behind. How do I marry that with very fast recovery time objectives? So what Veeam does, Veeam integrates directly with ONTAP, and it does other storage platforms as well, but our integration with ONTAP is actually more advanced than some of the other platforms. And what it does is it gives you the ability to what we call get RTPOs, or a combination of recovery point and recovery time objectives, under 15 minutes. So worst case scenario, get your data back, get your application service back up under 15 minutes. There's some folks out here, Shawn, he's in the field, he's in the trenches, he can tell you real world stuff. So this isn't just, marketing fluff. But what we wanted to talk about today, we only obviously have a short period of time to share some of this stuff with you. So please come back to the booth if you want to get into more in-depth conversation. But Shawn, why don't you come up? So Shawn is one of our solution architects. He's, I guess you're a Veeam veteran at this point, right? How long have you been on board?
Just about 6 years.
Yeah, so we're only 10 years old, so he's been here for most of them. So Shawn, when you're out with customers, right? I mean, and it might actually, let me take a step back. If you're walking into a, say, non-Veeam environment, right? Mm-hmm. What are some of the pain points or things that you hear from people in terms of what they're trying to accomplish and what they can't do with their existing infrastructure with respect to fast data recovery, making sure that data is protected so that there's no data loss avoidance and those types of things?
Sure. I think the biggest challenge that people encounter is the speed of recoveries, right? Because often with legacy solutions, you're approaching recovery different than we approach it with Veeam. You're having to actually restore a large amount of data before you can recover any application, right? So that takes a considerable amount of time, especially if you're doing it from tape, right? You gotta wait for the tapes to get there first before you can start restoring any data. But Veeam approaches it completely differently in that we go straight to the recovery and we worry about the restoration of data after.
So you're talking about, for example, doing recoveries directly from NetApp storage snapshots, right?
Directly from storage snapshots or directly from off-array backups.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Again, when we're talking about if I had a virtual workload crash, for example, what is it that we can do to get that service back up and running, leveraging ONTAP and NetApp storage?
Sure. So this is one of our key capabilities, right? High-speed recovery. So with high-speed recovery, especially with the NetApp ONTAP platform, we can leverage a combination of different technologies to provide you with the best possible recovery point and the best possible recovery time objectives. So what I mean by this is we can leverage things like array-based snapshots, right? Those crash-consistent snapshots that you can create very quickly on the array. We can do those every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, however often your business needs. So now your recovery point has shrinked to that 5-minute, 10-minute, or 15-minute interval, right? So you could also take off-array backups based off those snapshots as well. So this is one of our integration points. This is our backup from storage snapshots technology. And we can do this from the primary array snap, or we can actually take that primary snap, send it to SnapMirror or SnapVault, and take our off array backup there at the secondary location.
So non-disruptive, right? You can you can do things so that if you're doing a recovery, for example, you can flex clone, right? And so break it away from the primary storage, and that way it's not interrupting anything else that other services that might be live and running, right?
Sure.
So when you do that.
So that's our recovery point objective story, right? Kind of layering crash consistent on top of application consistent snapshots on top of off array backups, right? So now you talk about recovery time objectives. What we have there is another point of integration with our Veeam Explorer for storage snapshots. What this allows you to do is it allows you to actually perform a number of different restores directly from crash consistent or application consistent snaps. The restore options are the same. So that's why you get those short recovery point objectives, because you have the same recovery options regardless if it's an array-based or a Veeam created snapshot.
Right, and we pretty much cover almost the entire Microsoft suite, right, when you talk about Exchange, Active Directory, SharePoint, SQL, and now we have support for Oracle as well. So to your point, file level and even at table space level as well on the database side.
So you can get very granular application level restores directly from storage snapshots. And like I said, that's the same whether it's crash consistent or application consistent. The beauty of it is you can go to an existing NetApp shop, right, install Veeam. If they've already have 1,000 snapshots that they've taken in SnapVault and all these different combinations, Veeam will auto-discover all of those snapshots, auto-discover all the virtual machines inside those snapshots, and we can perform restores from snapshots we've never even touched before.
So we discover that environment and make it snap right into the existing environment very quickly.
Correct.
So the last thing we're going to talk about before we wrap up, and I kind of alluded to it earlier in terms of how do you leverage your investments of your existing infrastructure, is something called leverage data. Mm-hmm. So basically, most people think of their backup infrastructure as an insurance policy. It's there if I need it, hope I don't want to use it, but what ways can they, say, repurpose that when you're not doing, say, a recovery, for example, to enable other things,
Sure.
DevOps or whatever?
And this is actually one of my favorite points of integration. So this is our third point of integration. It's called the on-demand sandbox for storage snapshots, right? How many of you out there have a dedicated test dev environment? Right? I run into a lot of customers that have dedicated test dev environments. The challenge there is keeping that test dev environment in line with production, right? It's always behind production, a week, a month, whatever it may be. The nice thing about the on-demand sandbox for storage snapshots is Veeam can actually create a virtual lab. And what the virtual lab is, it's a construct, right? It essentially isolates anything that goes inside that virtual lab from interfering with your production environment. So now I can take an existing snapshot that I have, primary or secondary, once again, so I can really leverage that disaster recovery site that I've invested in for things like test dev, right? And I can stand it up ad hoc. I can take any virtual machine inside that snapshot and stand it up in the virtual lab without affecting anything else. And then now I can do a number of different things, right? Tests, patches, fixes. I can crash it. I can blow it up. I can use it for disaster recovery scenario testing, right? A number of different things, and it doesn't affect my snapshots at all.
That last point's real critical, because you talk about making application changes, and how many times do those get put into production, and then you discover in production that there was a bug or there was some problem, right? So here's another way to increase uptime, is that you use this on-demand sandbox to introduce, whatever changes that you're making, and make sure that, and it's a production-like environment, right? So it's everything that you have going in production, and you can see whether or not it's kosher, and if it isn't, then you back it out and you move on.
So it overcomes that challenge of test dev lagging behind production, right? Because that snapshot, I could have just created it 2 minutes ago, and I can stand it up in this environment. So I have very much production-like data inside that virtual lab for testing. So, I mean, who here loves installing service packs when Microsoft released one? Yeah, nobody, right? Why? Because it's dangerous, right? So you can actually test those service pack installations in production-like environment before you actually roll it out into production.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Shawn. So that wraps it up. Like I said, we're going to be at the booth here. So if you have any other questions, we're happy to dig into it with you. So thanks again for your time.